Hey everybody, welcome to the Chris and Dan Show. Today we have Jason Greenwood with us. Jason, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate you having me on the show today. It's really looking forward to the chat. Yeah, my name's Jason Greenwood, and look, my background is really pretty wildly varied. I'm probably a little bit unique in that I never went to university, never got, and worked hospitality for a few years. Was born and raised in Southern California, grew up in Southern California, moved to New Zealand in my early 20s, and and have been living in Mexico, in Puebla, Mexico. Well, been living in Mexico for the last year and a half, and my wife and I spent all of 2023 traveling extensively around Mexico by car, doing all the things. You're going to see this as a trend throughout my story, is that I do lots of things that the world tells you not to do, and that you'll never succeed and that you'll die and all these things. I definitely am a bit of a rogue in that sense, and I always have been. I always have been, a person that never really followed societal norms. We spent we did almost 20,000 kilometers traveling around Mexico in 2023 before deciding to settle in Puebla, Mexico, from 2024, and we've been here since January, and absolutely loving it, and have been living the digital nomad lifestyle for a number of years. And I've been working in the e-commerce space for the last 24 plus years, and have owned my own independent e-commerce consultancy for the last nearly 4 years, and absolutely love it. Love the lifestyle. Love living a life that's quite different to what the normal life that people live. And my wife and I are also a little bit interesting in that we don't have or want kids, and we have a dog. I think they call that a dink nowadays. We didn't have a
Dual
saying for
income, no kids. Yeah.
we didn't have a saying we didn't have a saying for that back in the day. It was just you were weird if you didn't want to have kids. But my wife and I don't have or want kids, and but we live a great lifestyle, and
Yep.
we really enjoy it.
That's awesome. I talk to Chris all the time. My wife's Mexican American. We actually just traveled to Mexico City earlier this year. My first time in Mexico City. We go to Mexico because I'm on the Arizona Mexico border. So we go almost every weekend. My father-in-law lives there. But it's not really in Mexico. I mean, it's just on the other side of the border.
Yeah.
But Mexico City is an experience, and I keep telling Chris and people that I know, there's a lot of Americans, Europeans, just expats from different countries living in Latin America, specifically around Mexico City. And I know Puebla is not too far out. I
Yeah.
almost went as far as going out there. We took like a tour guide and we almost went out to like Puebla. We didn't actually make it all the way out there, but man, it's amazing. The first thing people worry about obviously is it safe? Driving all around Mexico. I've done Nayarit. I've flown to Mazatlan and drove to like 3 hours to another city. If you don't know what you're doing or where you're going, it can be dangerous. Or if you're flashy, what are your experiences with driving all over Mexico? Because I know even local Mexicans sometimes are like, hey, you gotta be careful what roads you take, how you get there. Like, how do you plan for that kind of stuff?
Yeah, look, I mean, I guess we were a little bit naive, but maybe that's a good thing. When I grew up in Southern California, so I had been down to Mexico, down the Baja Coast, when I was younger, down in Mexico a number of times, and always loved it. Always loved the culture, always loved the food, always loved the people, always loved the weather, the sightseeing, just an incredible, diverse country. And so I guess I took Spanish in high school, although I never got to use it in New Zealand. And so it was definitely a steep learning curve to try to remember all the Spanish I learned in high school, and doing the Duolingo thing and everything. And my wife doesn't speak a word of Spanish really, and so really it
Uh,
was up to me to translate for the vast majority of our trip. So it was trial
So,
by fire. But
you and your, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you and your wife have lived there for a year and a half and she still does not speak any Spanish?
no, she's my wife's Asian actually. She was born and raised in New Zealand, but she's Chinese Vietnamese, and she speaks Cantonese as her second language. And her family, they speak Cantonese, and so yeah, it's definitely it's something that's absolutely on her priority list. But she speaks the odd word here and there, but certainly she's definitely not fluent, that's for sure. And I'm not fluent either, but I'm conversational, so I can get along in Spanish, and we can do all the things we need to do here in Spanish. And what a lot of
So,
Americans perhaps don't realize, sorry to interrupt, is that English is most Americans that come to visit Mexico, they think English is spoken everywhere in Mexico, and it really just isn't. It's in the main tourist centers, you'll get people that will have transactional English capability, but when you get to a place like Puebla or whatever, there's almost no English spoken here. And
Yeah.
even in Mexico City, there's very little English spoken except in the touristy areas. And so yeah, you will not really enjoy Mexico that much if you can't at least speak conversational Spanish. And I think a lot of Americans are a little bit naive to that idea, and they come here and they do expect people to be able to speak English to them, and it's just not the case. And we learned that the hard way as we traveled around the country, that's for sure.
Yeah, Americans have a strange way of being entitled that way, going
Yeah.
going to countries and thinking everyone speaks English. It's just not the case.
Yeah. But I mean, in terms of safety, we had no issues. We were very fortunate. I think as long as you stick to the main roads, as long as you don't drive at night, we drove at night a few times, but only in the safe places. As long as you don't drive at night, as long as you stay to the main roads, as long as you stay on the quotas, which are the toll roads where available, as long as you know where you're going, as long as you stay in the nicer side of town, as long as you don't, as long as you drive, a lot of Americans, they drive their American plated cars down to Mexico, and they don't realize it makes them quite a target. We bought our car in Mexico City, so it's a Mexican plated car. It has tinted windows, so you couldn't really tell who was inside of it. We just tried to be as smart as we would be in any big city anywhere in the world, and we really didn't have any issues. We had one border stop between the state of Chiapas and I think it's Tabasco. I think is the northern side of Chiapas, and that was a little bit scary. We were stopped by basically border patrol there between the two states, and that was a little intimidating. Carrying machine guns and everything else. They wanted to see our ID and everything else. But after 15 minutes and sort of checking our car and our luggage and everything else, they let us be on our way. So that was probably the scariest situation. They weren't wearing the traditional insignias of the Guardia Nacional or the police, and so we weren't aware who they are, but I did some research after the fact online, and it turns out that the Federal Court of Mexico has a special police force that are authorized by the court to stop the drug trade in Mexico. And they're almost like the FBI, and they operate mostly undercover, and they don't wear any specific insignia that would make them a target. And so that was who we believe actually stopped us at that border. And so yeah, I mean, look, there are certain times when you maybe don't know exactly what's going on in certain situations, but as long as you're friendly, as long as you're smart, as long as you act like you would in any, I mean, we've traveled pretty extensively around the world, and every big city has its places that are scary, that you don't belong. Don't go here, go there, and as long as you keep your wits about you, and as long as you're friendly, and as long as you're not flashy, and as long as you keep your phone, be aware, when you've got your phone out, be aware when you've got your wallet out, just be smart. And I think if you're smart and you've traveled at all kind of around the world, you'll be just fine in Mexico.
So we really need to get to why you're on, but I am very curious, early 20s, what would bring you to New Zealand? I mean, that's halfway around the world. That's not something in my young 20s that I even considered whatsoever, right? Maybe going to Mexico or Canada, sure, but not someplace halfway around the world to live.
Yeah. My grandfather was a Kiwi, so he was a New Zealander. He moved to the United States when he was young during the Depression, during the New Zealand Depression, and his father had died, and he was left supporting his mother and 6 sisters, and so he moved to the United States when he was young, married my grandmother, lived in the United States for the rest of his life. But we were able to get my parents, my sister, and myself. We were able to get residency by family relation in New Zealand, and we were all, in my early 20s. I'd already moved out. I was flatting and working, but my parents and the family were like a little bit sick of California. My dad was born and raised in California. My mother was born in Boston, but my grandparents moved her out to California when she was very young. And so she was raised in California and spent most of her life in California. And we were a bit over the United States. We're a bit over California. We're a bit over the smog, the crime, the traffic, all of the above. And we were like, hey, look, we've got this opportunity to move to New Zealand. And my parents decided they wanted to move to New Zealand to get residency through my grandfather, which they did. And they said, look, do you want to come? And I was like, well, hey, this looks like a pretty cool adventure. I'm not really stuck in California. I don't really necessarily need to live here for the rest of my life. And this seems like a pretty cool, exciting opportunity. And California's not going anywhere. If I absolutely hate it, well, I can always come back. And ended up moving there with my family, and ended up
So
moving in with my family and starting a business there with my family.
sounds somewhat similar to Dan. Somewhat,
To
no?
me, I
Yeah.
didn't move to New Zealand. What do you
No,
mean?
no, no. But you moved to another state with the intent, most likely, on moving back to
Oh,
California.
sure, but Arizona, you can't compare Arizona to New
No, no, no,
Zealand.
no, no, no. Of course not. Of course not.
But yeah,
No,
and
I don't
ended up living
think
there
I
for
would do
28
that.
years. Ended up living there for 28 years, and
That's
I don't know if you
crazy.
guys know, but during the pandemic, New Zealand was one of the most locked down countries in the entire
We
world.
absolutely
I
saw
was
that
gonna ask you,
news.
where did you live during the pandemic?
Auckland, yeah,
Were
we
you
were
like,
living in an off-grid tiny house actually on a rural property, and so my wife and I were living in an off-grid tiny house. We don't jab, and we never will, and so we
yes,
had an extra special level of vitriol by our government. We had an extra special level of lack of freedom as
is
our
that why
as
you
our
moved?
that was definitely one of the contributing factors. Like, I'm a big freedom guy. Maybe it's my American heritage, I don't know, but I'm a big personal freedom guy. And we were effectively locked down and border closed for 3 years. It was a terrible place to be during the
Hey,
pandemic. It was
Yeah.
it
same
was
thing in California. I
No,
mean,
not the same. It was like
it
New
was
I'm
Zealand
making a
was
joke.
the
I
yeah,
make that joke.
blueprint for like prison
Yeah, concentration
planet.
camps,
yeah,
basically.
yeah. New Zealand and Australia, two of the most locked down places in the entire
Wow,
world.
I was gonna ask you if you wanted to go into that, but didn't want to like touch on, sensitive topics, but
Oh, look, no topic is too sensitive for me. But yeah, look, there was a lot of reasons. I already had clients in North America. I had clients in Europe. The ANZ time zones are pretty difficult when you're serving a Northern Hemisphere client base. Um,
Mm.
you know, e-commerce in America is a really big deal. I was already speaking at conferences in the States, and just getting back into North America with easy access to the US, and being able to really grow my career exponentially, via North America was a pretty big deal. The freedom thing was a big deal. The cost of living in New Zealand is extremely high. It's a very remote country. The average mortgage in New Zealand is about $1 million nowadays. And we're just in
Wow.
the process of buying a townhouse here in Puebla, and 3-story, 3-bedroom, 4-bathroom, rooftop terrace, brick and tile, brand new. We're getting that for around 250,000 New Zealand
Wow,
dollars.
nice,
And
nice.
in New Zealand, the exact same type of place would be well over $1 million. It'd probably be somewhere between 1.2 and $1.5 million or something like that in Auckland for the same type of place. And so for us, the cost of living is part of it. The weather in New Zealand it's pretty wet and cold. I like
Really?
the sun, and it's not the weather in New Zealand is not like Australia. Australia's closer to the equator, and so it's a lot warmer and sunnier. I've got a lot of family that live in
Nice.
Brisbane, Australia. My sister, my brother-in-law, my 2 nephews, and my mom all live in Brisbane, and they love it there. And yeah, so there was a
Wow.
lot of motivations to move to Mexico, but definitely I personally reached the tipping point during COVID, and my wife and I were like, the moment we can get the hell out of here, because we're big travelers, we love
Yeah.
seeing the world through different people's eyes. We have deep empathy for different cultures and different languages and different foods and all those different things, and we like to see the world through other people's eyes, where they live and where they come from, and
Did
meeting them
anyone
where they
come to
are.
your house and like when during the like peak lockdown and say, "Hey, where's your papers? Like,
They did come to my house when I made the fatal mistake of walking into a convenience store without a mask on. And the
Wow.
owner of the convenience store got my number plate and reported me to the police. And the police came to my
wow.
door. Within about 30 minutes, they were at my door saying, "You can't do that. You got to have a mask if you're going into a store." And so
Wow.
yeah, so that was pretty. It was pretty intense. It was pretty intense during that time. So
Are you an American citizen at the time or a New Zealand
a dual citizen.
dual?
Yeah.
I know we need to talk about your business and being an expat and all that stuff. That kind of shit interests me a lot. I gotta ask you about the recent elections in Mexico.
Yep.
Sheinbaum,
Yep.
not a fan. Uh, I'm about to be dual citizen too through my wife. What, like the fervor around her was high. She has the potential of leading Mexico down the New Zealand path if they're not careful. I mean, just want to give some thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, it's interesting. As I've traveled around, there was mixed feelings because AMLO was president, obviously, when we first moved here. He was a pretty divisive president as well. I mean, half the country absolutely loved him, half the country absolutely hated him. I think that divide and rule or divide and conquer or whatever you want to call it is pretty common around the world. It seems to be how the political elites find their power base is divide and conquer. And so, I wasn't, for all the bluster about, AMLO being a communist or Sheinbaum being a communist, first woman leader of Mexico, first Jewish Mexican leader of Mexico, interesting, cultural changes are happening in Mexico. But the only thing I can do is look at the reality of what's actually happening in the country on the ground. And for example, what actually happened during COVID in Mexico. So in theory, COVID is a member of the WHO and, is signed on to the United Nations, and in theory is a globalist sycophant, just like every other country seems to be. But the reality of what happens on the ground in Mexico is something very different. And, during COVID, they kept the border open right throughout. They're one of the only countries in the world that you could come to right throughout the whole of COVID. The Mexican economy actually boomed during COVID. They had no jab mandates in Mexico. They had very, very short lockdowns in Mexico. Most cities had less than a month worth of lockdowns for the whole of COVID. Yes, there were mask mandates, but they were regional, they were local, they were on and off again during the time. So, in theory, Mexico is a globalist sycophant, just like every other country, just like the U.S. and everybody else. But in practice, they're pretty pragmatic. When you have a country where people need to work and they're living paycheck to paycheck, you would have caused mass riots. When you don't have the kind of social safety nets in the country like America does, like New Zealand does, like Australia does, where you can just pour billions of dollars worth of printed money into the economy, to get people to stand down and stay at home. When you don't have that, you will have rioting in the streets if you tell people they can't work and feed their families. And so I think there's a practical nature to Mexico that I absolutely love. There's two other things about Mexico that make it quite unique in the way that they handled COVID and freedom and everything else. One is the strength of the cartels here is pretty impressive. And there are a couple of upsides to the strength of the cartels in Mexico. And people don't like to hear this, but I live here and I know what this is like. There are a couple of upsides to the cartels. One is they act as a very powerful counterbalance to governmental power. So the government is not all powerful here. And so they act as a counterbalance to each other. The government keeps the cartels in check. The cartel keeps the government in check. And I don't know if you heard, but during the election cycle this year in Mexico, there were 37 candidates that were killed by the cartels.
Yep.
Okay. So the reality is that the cartels are very, very powerful. And they're not just involved in drugs. They're involved in every single business enterprise, major business enterprise in this country. So they act as a counterbalance to totalitarian rule by the government. The other benefit of the cartel, sorry, Chris.
Real quick, I just want to say, so that sounds like it's similar to the way the legislative branch and the executive branch are supposed to operate in America. Sounds very similar.
Very similar, but It doesn't always work that way in the United States, but you know,
Sure.
the
That's what
second
I'm
big,
saying, the way
yeah,
it's supposed
yeah,
to
it's
operate.
intended to work, right? It's
Yeah.
intended to be a counterbalance. The
Yep.
second big thing about the cartels that most people don't pay attention to is that cash is king, queen, and bishop in this country. Cash still rules the roost in Mexico. There are many, many, many businesses that will only accept cash. They do not accept card. Cash is everywhere here, right? And that's never going to change because the cartels largely operate in cash. So cash, this is never going to be a digital first. Well, at least in my lifetime. Anyway, this country is not going to become a CBDC is not going to take over here. You know, cash is not going to go away out of this economy anytime soon, and that's largely thanks to the cartels. So these are a couple of the benefits of having the cartels be so powerful that the vast majority of the rest of the world doesn't actually think of as benefits, but I see them on the ground. I see the benefits of these things in Mexico because I live here.
It's
And I think
fascinating.
I think that the cash only thing is very true in many Latin American countries.
Yes.
There's a gentleman I watch on YouTube regularly, and he lives in Colombia, says the same thing. There's just no way they replace cash in Colombia. Everything's done in cash. Even buying a house is done in cash, right? They
Yeah.
won't accept even a bank loan,
Yes, correct.
right?
Yeah, well,
You gotta
there's
have the
bank
cash.
loans. We're paying cash for our townhouse because credit here is not a
Wow.
thing. It's
Yeah.
not
When
a
you
thing.
mean cash for your townhome, like you literally going with a briefcase of paper cash, or you're writing a check?
Direct bank transfer,
Okay, okay,
but you know, paying cash, no credit, no loan, no mortgage,
Yep.
because mortgages here are not a thing. You know, the federal interest rate here is 11.25%. You know, the
Wow.
reality is they're trying to get on top of inflation here, which is through the roof, and the economy is not as elastic in the sense that higher interest rates don't slow down inflation as fast here because there's so little debt here. And so you know, higher interest rates don't affect that many people in Mexico, and it doesn't really slow down spending because people don't live on credit here like they do in the United States. Big difference.
Right.
Hmm.
There's no such thing as living beyond your means in Mexico.
It happens, but it's
Yeah.
not nearly as common.
Right.
So there are, you know, there's new and there's some of these neobanks, Klar, and a few others that, you know, extend credit in Mexico, but it's very small. I mean,
Right.
I have a new bank account here in Mexico, and my credit limit is 3,000 pesos, which is like $200 or something like that. So it's just insane. You know, you can get credit here in theory, but it's very hard to get. The credit limits are very, very low. And you know, it's not a credit-driven society. It's a cash-driven society.
Right.
It's a pay-as-you-go society.
Much better.
I think so.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good with that. I could see a lot of bad as well, you know, like no more real estate investing for a lot of people. If you gotta buy cash for
Yeah.
every investment property you make,
Yep.
that would reduce what, 90% of the investment
Yeah, but
speculators here in the US?
it keeps the housing pricing low.
Keeps them down. Well, the hard counter is maybe the monopolies take over even more. I don't know. Like in Mexico, I'm not sure what the real estate investment market looks like, but maybe there's a lot of expats coming in with the US loans.
Correct. They'll take out like a, you know, a HELOC off their property in the U.S. or they'll sell their property in the U.S. and then they'll move down here and they'll buy 2 or 3 places down here for the equivalent
I
sum
think
of
there's
money.
two extremes. Maybe there's got to be a middle ground, and I think Mexico maybe is going to eventually come around to it. But like you said, I think it's really unique in the sense that cash will never truly go away there. So it's a way to keep speculation in check, like at least for their internal citizens.
Well, and
Interesting.
there's no housing crisis here. So that was the, you know, New Zealand housing crisis, Australia housing crisis, UK housing crisis, Canada housing crisis,
But I
US
heard like
housing
Mexico
crisis.
City, a lot of them complaining, locals complaining, oh, Mexicans or US coming in here, Americans coming in here and drive the cost of everything up. So there's some of that going on.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's gentrification. I'm not going to argue against that. But what I am saying is that, you know, for example, here in Puebla, there is a tremendous amount of building going on, and they can keep up with demand here. It's not a problem of not having the bodies able to build fast enough to keep up with the demand. They absolutely can. I mean, our townhouse, well, this is a 3-phase large Privada build with a couple of hundred townhouses in it, and they're going to have all 3 phases done in like 9 months. It's less than 9 months. Ours went from just in the last 2 weeks, it went from like 60% complete. We just went and saw it on Sunday, and it's like 85% complete. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal how fast they build here. It really is incredible how much manpower they can bring to bear on building projects when they finally decide to spool them up. It's pretty impressive. And also the building codes, they're a lot less restrictive here. The property tax is it's going to cost me like 100 New Zealand dollars a year for property tax. My property tax in New Zealand, also known as rates, would be on the same type of townhouse would be probably between $4,000 and $6,000 a year. So it's just difficult to compare the two. It's
Wow.
the ability for Mexico to build houses at scale is something I've never really witnessed before, and so therefore there's just not the in really popular congested places like Mexico City. Sure, there are land shortages in certain popular areas, absolutely, and as a result of that, they just can't build anymore there. And as a result of that, if you look at Roma, Condesa, the really Santa Fe, the really popular expat enclaves of Mexico City, well, the prices there are just as bad as they are in the U.S. But that doesn't mean you have to live there. You can live other places. It just seems that most of the expats in Mexico City like to congregate with other expats, and that's what's gentrifying those areas and pushing Mexicans
Yeah,
out.
I did
So-
notice that.
So Jason, we could do another hour and a half of this, but we should probably talk, because we only
Yeah.
have 25 minutes left. Should probably talk about why you're here.
Yeah.
So,
Educate us on Mexico, being an expat in Mexico, man. If shit hits the fan, I'm going there. I already
Yeah.
told you that.
Yeah. Well, the
Yeah.
doors are open. We've got a 3-bedroom place, and it's just my wife and I and our dog. So the idea is to have lots of our friends and family. Well, in fact, I have my 50th later this year. I'm a Halloween baby, and my birthday's
Dude,
Halloween.
you do
and I
not
have
look
my 50th
50
this year.
at all,
no,
man.
you don't.
Oh,
Holy
You look
crap.
really good for your age.
Thank you. Well, maybe it's the not having kids. I don't know, but
It's all the tacos you're eating.
yeah, absolutely. And my dog's a terrierist, and so he makes me walk at least 3 times a day. Otherwise, he's climbing the wall, so that's got to help. But yeah, so I've got my 50th, and we're going down to Playa del Carmen, and I got people coming from all over the world for my party. So we're looking forward to it. But like you probably want to know, what is it about this digital nomad thing? How did I do it?
Well, I was curious how you got started, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well,
go ahead.
I'm lucky in that I work in e-commerce, and I've been working in e-commerce for over 24 years. So we have always been able to be digital nomads in the sense that we've always in our industry been able to be remote. We've always been able to work, online, etc. But pre-COVID, it's really interesting. Even in our industry, pre-COVID, there was always an expectation from clients that you would go in and meet them at least one time in person, that they could eyeball you, they could shake your hand, you could go and meet with the board before they signed off on any major project or working with you or whatever it might be. COVID even put that to rest. So now, like, for example, I've got my own independent consultancy. I can work anywhere in the world. I work remotely, and zero of my customers have any expectation that they will ever meet me in person. Now, sometimes we do. So, for example, if I'm in their area and I'm on a business trip, or I'm at a conference, or I'm on travel, or whatever it might be, and I'm in their hood, I'll go out of my way to go and visit them at their offices and meet them. But there is zero expect by my clients that they will ever meet me in person. And they're willing to sign off on very big projects and very big engagements completely remotely. And this is something that is one of the benefits of COVID, is that it turned an entire generation into a Zoom generation. And it took people that previously thought, well, this stuff can only be done in person, to, oh my God, actually we can do most of what we do remotely, and it doesn't harm the work quality. It doesn't harm the communication. In fact, in some respects, communication is better and it's more frequent because of all the different communication channels we have now. And so, I've owned my own e-commerce pure play. I've worked in and built agencies and owned agencies. I've worked for some very big brands in the ANZ region. And, I knew that my wife and I, especially during COVID, it was reinforced. We want to travel. We want to spend our time seeing the world. And I can't do that if I'm running and building an agency with big teams and all that sort of stuff, and I'm doing 80-hour weeks. And so, with intention, while we were still in the middle of COVID and I was still building an agency and co-owning it with a friend of mine, I decided, look, I need to become independent. I need to go independent. I need to not have a big team that needs to be in the office, and I can then be location independent, and I can charge in USD. I can charge in any currency I like, and I can have total flexibility around my lifestyle. So, saved up at least 6 months worth of runway. I had a client while I was still building the agency that I was at just before I went independent who wanted to work with me directly, and so that in addition to intentionally saving up, because I knew once I went independent, it would take, it'd take 6 to 12 months to build up a pipeline and to have, to basically replace my industry income with an independent consultancy income. I knew that wasn't going to happen overnight. I knew that was going to take a little bit of time. So we saved up a little bit of money to allow me to do that. Now, fortunately, I didn't have to dig into any of that money because the business grew faster than perhaps what I thought it might. And but I had that one foundational client that wanted to work with me directly.
What year was this?
This was nearly 4 years ago. So
Okay.
so
right
at
the start of COVID.
Yeah, right. Well, it was actually about midway through COVID when I decided finally to go out on my own, and basically I sold my shares in the agency back to my friend who was the founder of the agency, and so that created a cushion for me to be able to go out on my own. I worked independently on my own in New Zealand, built up, but the key here is that I had already been building my personal brand on social media for the prior 8 years. So I was building my podcast audience. I was putting out content nearly every single day on LinkedIn. I've now got 33,000 followers on LinkedIn.
What's your podcast, just for the plug for people?
It's called The E-Commerce Edge. We've just ticked over 400 published episodes.
Nice. Congrats.
And so I think that this is really important for anybody out there who's thinking about becoming a digital nomad. I think that if you build an audience before you need it and before you need to monetize it, that makes the transition into digital nomadism significantly easier. Now, sure, you can burn the boats, you can quit your job and try to, build your business on the fly whilst you're also traveling and everything else. But it's far easier in my experience to build that audience. So I was building an audience when I was still an employee, right? I was building an audience before I ever needed it. I was just trying to become well known as a thought leader in my space by putting my thoughts out into the world. I had gotten my ass kicked verbally by Gary Vee enough times by him saying, well, if you think you're a thought leader, put your thoughts out into the world and let the market decide. And so I finally said, okay, Gary Vee, I'll start producing content. I'll start telling my story. I'll start putting my ideas out into the world. And I'm very, very glad that I did. I had no idea what exactly would come out of that or what benefits would come out of that or even any benefits would come out of it. But I had to just trust the process. And, I started meeting different people because of my content. I started being given conference speaking opportunities, and just all sorts of crazy opportunities came out of putting the best content I could out into the world with the best knowledge I had. And so it definitely did. By the time I decided to go out on my own, I had a big enough audience that it made that transition significantly easier.
Sounds very much like somebody I know.
You guys?
Doesn't it, Dan?
Yeah, Gary Vee kicked my ass too. 2009 when I read Crush It. 2010 I started doing clinical research content, and I just connected with you on LinkedIn, by the way, too. So
Great.
pretty impressive profile, and sub to the YouTube channel. You ever read this book, The Sovereign Individual?
No, but I have heard of it quite a bit.
This is you, man. Like,
yeah,
this is you because you're taking it to the full extent, meaning you physically moved borders.
yeah.
There's degrees of it, like yoga. I've mentally done it. Like, I can work from anywhere, but I choose to be in the US. My clients are also digital, so is Chris. But you've like fully done it to where you said fuck it. Like as soon as you didn't like New Zealand's things and they, unshackled you, you left. Right. Same thing with a lot of people doing from California, they're moving to other states. I highly recommend that book. It's predicts the end of the nation state and the beginning of like these sovereignties where there's like pockets, and Mexico seems to be one of them. And if the smarter countries are going to be more welcoming, you see El Salvador now cleaning up and really like attracting a lot of business capital over there.
Argentina.
Argentina with Malay. I wish
Yep.
Mexico would their elections would have gone that route too. Unfortunately, in my opinion, it took a step backwards. But like you
I agree.
said,
I agree.
on the ground, very practical. It's different than you know what my wife told me once? I told her, hey, this president's a socialist, this and that. And she said, yeah, you know what? But in Mexico, maybe that's actually not a bad thing. Considering the alternative, getting bribed by cartels. And
Yeah.
I had to like just not say anything and listen. Like I'm thinking like an American where we still have freedoms, even though people complain way too much. But in a country like that, that really like resonated with me. Like, okay, shit, maybe we can't compare everything to the US.
Yeah, well, look, it's Latin American cultures are very different, and they typically respect very strong central leadership. They respect that. There's most of Latin America is a very patriarchal society, and
Yeah.
in that sense, they look to strong leadership. And the other thing that I think many people who haven't traveled extensively throughout LATAM forget is that Mexico in particular, for example, and it's true in most late Latin American countries, it is 82% Roman Catholic here, right?
Yeah.
As we traveled around the country, I saw fewer homeless people on the streets in this country than I saw in New Zealand. Now, there's a reason for that. There's a hierarchy in this country. It is God, family, community, in that order. That is the top three priorities in this country. So whether
You hear that,
whether you're
Chris? Mexico's for you, man.
whether you're a Christian or not, regardless, the point is that there is a unifying belief system here. There is a unifying priority list here that starts with God, it goes to family, then it goes to community. And because there's not a huge social safety net from the government here, people have to look out for each other. They have to, the church has to look after their parish. Family has to look after family. You will very, very, very rarely see homeless people in this country because if someone's down on their luck, if there's a family member nearby, the family member will take them in until they get back
They
on their feet.
live by that, man. I go like once a month to visit my father-in-law. Every time I go, almost, hey, some third cousin needs help, have them come over and have tacos. At least they'll eat for today, for the weekend. Like,
Yep.
it's
You see
real
more homeless
shit.
dogs than you do homeless people in this country.
Yeah.
That's the sad part. There's something like
Yeah.
70 million homeless dogs, roughly
The dogs are
in Mexico.
crazy.
So that's the sad bit.
The
You won't see a lot
dogs
of
are
homeless
crazy.
people, but you see plenty of homeless dogs. It's just the way it is here.
Yep. I think there's a lot of lessons we can learn from LATAM, and I think we're not going to live to be 300, but if you let it play out, I think those are going to be the enclaves of success, unless something like global government takes over, which is possible.
Yes.
Not to get too sidetracked, but digital nomad, let's say so is it strictly e-commerce that you're doing right now?
Yeah, I'm a little bit interesting in that I've specialized and I've niched down really, really hard on B2B e-commerce consultancy. So as opposed to working with major retailers, it's B2B brand selling, so it's businesses selling to other businesses. And it's also, I work with primarily enterprise merchants that are doing a minimum of about $20 million a year or more in GMV, up to sort of that $1 billion mark. I also have a deep specialization in tech and ops. So I'm a senior solution architect and have been for many years. And I architect across the whole of the commerce stack. So it's not just the e-commerce front end, it's ERP, CRM, CDP, PIM, system integration, point of sale systems. It's everything in the commerce stack I architect around and can help businesses with. And I
Man,
also
you're a
don't.
beast. You're a beast.
Thanks. And I don't just consult to merchants. I also consult to investors in the e-commerce space. I consult to agencies in the e-commerce space, B2B agencies, and I also consult to software vendors in the e-commerce space. And so there's kind of 4 strings to my bow. And it's been really it's been an exciting run, and I continue to absolutely love what I do. Eventually, I'd like content to really look after maybe 90+% of my income. Within the next 5 years, that's a goal of mine, to get to a place where content is the primary source of my income. But I'll never stop consulting, because I'll always have a couple of clients a year, because it helps me keep my finger on the pulse of what's actually happening in the market. You start to lose touch with reality pretty quickly if you're not actually working in these businesses. And so I'll never
Yes.
just do content. I'll always do some element of consulting to keep my sword sharp.
Well,
That's
see,
smart. I
you,
told you,
no,
Chris.
you and him are identical in terms of your business
It's
perspective.
sometimes the only reason why I own a research clinic, really. Although this one's the one
Exactly.
I stumbled into is actually a good business of itself. But yeah, we're pretty much cut from the same cloth. I think Chris is too. He's just he's not online that often. Now we're forcing him to be online more though.
And do you
This
like
is
it?
a
Are
fact.
you loving it, Chris? Are you loving it more?
Loving? No, not necessarily, but I mean, I don't dislike it either.
You've been dragged kicking and screaming into this
Pretty
content
much.
game.
Pretty much.
He's still not on LinkedIn seeing
No,
all
no,
the
no.
woke
You may
stuff, and
you may be logged into LinkedIn for the
you're
first
logged in.
LinkedIn for the
You
first time
don't
in 7
live there.
years.
You don't live there and see all the nonsense, like self-gratifying woke cesspool that LinkedIn has become.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, I'm disgusted with it, and I live on there. I'm basically posting like 5 times a day, but LinkedIn is so bad with the virtue signaling.
Yeah.
It is
It
the
is.
worst.
You have to curate your feed pretty hard, and I'm lucky I've done that. I think I've got about 1,000 people on my block list, and so I have a really good community around me, my content that's supportive, and I am very liberal with the block button, and
You
it's
know
it's
the
it's
post's gonna start good when it says, I am humbly what is it? Humbly
humble
honored.
brag.
They always start it with some stupid shit though. Like I am beyond grateful. That's the
Yes,
one. Beyond
yes,
humbled, beyond grateful. It's like, no, you're not. It's fucking stupid shit.
yeah,
Just write just write what you feel. Nobody's gonna care. They might
yeah.
actually resonate with you more. And then they always have a picture of them doing some weird shit that they don't do in real life. I hate it, man. I hate it.
Yeah. It can be bad, but it can be very good too, and
Oh,
I have LinkedIn to thank for, a big chunk of my business, so I can't complain
me
too
too.
much.
Me too. Me too. You have to deal with that bullshit. If it
Yeah.
was not for having digital businesses, I would not be on any of this shit. And I feel like you're the same, and we would be Chris,
Yeah.
basically.
Wait. Just to clarify, 10 years ago, you and I had this conversation. You're already there. You're already established. No need for me to be there,
It's
which I was
matured so
thankful
much
for.
that you do need to be there, and you have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, I'm actually getting more business from Reddit now than I am from LinkedIn, which
Reddit.
is crazy,
Wow.
And I'm one of maybe the like 99.5% of people on Reddit are anonymous, right? They have anonymous accounts.
Yeah.
I'm part of that 0.5% that uses my real name, that has a real profile with real links, and I think that's actually been beneficial to me, because people can then.
You're giving. I'm sorry. You're giving Dan ideas. I can see the wheels
No, I
turning
was
in
gonna
Dan's
have
head. But
you
go
take
ahead.
over Reddit, Chris. Like
Yeah.
you start with this shit.
Yeah, you can deal with Reddit. Reddit's a unique beast. It's a unique beast, but I have, I've gotten a fair bit of business there. In fact, I got another meeting this week from somebody else
What
that
do you
found
do
me
on
on
Reddit
Reddit.
though? Like, do you post or
I
do you
go in
just
and
reply?
I post. I have some subs around e-commerce that I post to, as well as I spend a lot of time there just answering a truckload of questions around e-commerce there.
It's just a lot, man. Chris, you want to take over Reddit duties?
No, I don't. We can hire somebody to do
We can
this.
get Ashley Margot. I think. What do you feel about
Not Ashley.
delegating? Like, Ashley would do good on Reddit. She's anal. I feel like on Reddit you need to be super anal, super detailed, right? Am I right?
Yeah, well, I think if you're gonna if you're going to have a real profile, then yeah, you got to be, you have to be ready for, you have to have a very thick skin on Reddit, much thicker than on LinkedIn, because 99.9% of people on Reddit are anonymous. Their accounts are anonymous. They speak with a level of harshness and bluntness and ruthlessness on Reddit that they don't speak with on any other social media
Chris,
platform.
that's all you would excel on this shit.
You could kill
Yeah,
it. You could be
well,
anonymous on there and you could crush it.
yeah, it might actually kill people. I don't know.
I know. But
Wow.
and I've never gotten into X. It's never, I've tried. It's just never really been
I
my
just
thing.
followed you on X.
Yeah, I've never gotten any traction there. I've tried, I've put in the effort, but it's never really paid any dividends. So I've
I
really just
think
never.
on X, which is why I don't do well, you have to be like, you have to have a strong, not just a strong opinion, you almost have to be a cartoon character of who you really are.
A caricature. Yeah.
Yeah, like, okay, I feel this way. Well, you got to be that way 1,000 times on steroids all the time. You
Yeah.
can't like actually be yourself because very few people are actually that way, but that's what X incentivizes is like, how far can you go on your opinion?
Hmm.
That's what I've noticed.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty blunt with my opinions. I'm kind of that way everywhere. Although, during COVID, for example, on LinkedIn, there was a lot of words that would automatically get your posts blocked and your account banned. I had to be really, really, really careful about my opinions on COVID handling on LinkedIn
Yep.
in particular, because I couldn't afford. It's such an important source of connection building for me
Yeah.
that I'm so reliant on it in the business community that I had to be ultra careful and self-censor basically
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. Otherwise, you'd get banned.
You
If
got
you
to neuter
said,
yourself.
yeah, if you
Like
said anything
YouTube.
against the government, if you said anything against lockdowns, if you said anything
Yeah.
against masking, if you said anything negative about the government's handling of COVID, you would get banned
We
from the
almost
platform.
lost our YouTube channel for number one, interviewing Dr. Peter McCullough. They took that
Wow.
video down. We interviewed him 2 or 3 times.
Wow.
Took it all of them down. I read a peer-reviewed article on COVID, like the mRNA lipid nanoparticles, like very nerd stuff,
Yes.
taken down. And then my third strike, because this was all somebody went to snipe all my
Yeah.
content, because I
Yeah.
would get like something from a year old come back and snipe, and then same thing, 2 snipes, and then I was like, shit, I gotta go into my channel because if you get 3 strikes in 90 days, you're
You're out.
done.
You're it.
Permanent.
Yes, right.
Permanent.
Yeah, you're banned.
So I had to go self-neuter my content. Like I just searched everything. What did I ever say controversial? All right, let's make this delete. You can't even make it private.
That's right. Yeah.
Delete.
Yeah,
Delete.
that's right. You got to delete it. And so
Yeah.
that's why I published, of course, my audio content to my podcast, but I published the video not only to YouTube but also to Rumble. I'm just I just am so concerned that at some point I'll say something inadvertently wrong on my YouTube
Yeah.
channel and I'll get banned. And I need another place to have my videos as a backup, as a
But
safety net to
B2B
that.
commerce, like, because essentially you're like teaching people or like explaining how to be B2B to commerce, right? How is that controversial? Like, do you
But
you just go off the deep end?
I'm pretty blunt in my podcast interviews, and I
Huh.
also give my guests a chance to ask me one question at the end of the interview. They get to ask me one question. And so I'm very, very brutally honest in my answers, and I'm very transparent, and and I do a lot of mentorship as well, and I record a lot of my mentorship episodes. So I have 3 episodes a week: Monday mentorship, Wednesday B2B, Friday is the tech focused episodes. And I just, I'm just myself. I just
So,
speak from the heart, and it's a little scary, unfortunately. On modern social media, you will get banned for things that you would never have thought possible, and it's a little scary.
so something like, hey, this governmental regulation kind of
Or
makes
I
it
was recording
difficult.
during COVID from my off-grid tiny house, and I was I'd mention about, oh, why are you there or whatever, and it's like, well, because we're locked down. I can't go anywhere. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's a joke, but we can't
Yeah,
actually go anywhere because the government's got us locked down, and
sure.
we don't. And if you say something like, well, we don't jab, and I'm not really happy about the fact that I have even less freedom than than the people that have been jabbed. That something as simple as that can get you banned, and you just have to be really careful. Unfortunately, it's a little bit better now because I think in hindsight everybody
Yeah.
realizes that it was a complete joke. But at the time, it was a really big deal.
No, absolutely.
I think Elon buying X
Yeah.
changed the game. And
A
we
little.
got
Totally agree.
A little.
no,
Yeah.
but he has a second and tertiary unintended consequences of him doing that because it's a competitive ecosystem, and YouTube and them said, okay, we gotta cut back a little bit on our censorship because
Yeah, a
there's
little.
comp.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. A little.
A little's all you need to kick down that door, man. Just a
Yeah.
little.
Well, and I find that a lot more people, I got quite a few. I probably got somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 direct messages on LinkedIn during that whole 3-year saga with people saying, "Man, I can't say I'm an employee. I can't speak about this stuff, but I like your posts." And so what I did is instead of making a post about my feelings, I would comment on other people's posts that were like posting Peter McCullough videos, etc. I would comment under those, and even there, I had to be real cautious, and I had to misspell things intentionally so that they wouldn't get caught by the censors, etc. But that was where I was the most honest. Was this is crap. I'm living this every day. I'm living this tyranny every day. I was pretty blunt and pretty transparent in those comments. But you had to be careful about how you worded things, how you said things. But I had people message me and say, "Hey, look, I can't do what you're doing because I'm an employee and I need my job. I can't afford to lose my job. I've got a family to feed. But I have so much respect for you being honest about your situation and about your feelings about everything else." They would say, keep going because, you're speaking on behalf of those of us who can't say anything, that are just not in the position to be able to do this. So please keep doing it.
I love that, man. And I think we can do like 2 more hours with
That's
you.
what
I
I
think
said. Absolutely could.
we'll probably do like a part 2 if you want.
Yeah,
We've never had
happy
a
to.
part 2, have we, Chris?
No, we
Besides
haven't.
Joey,
No,
who's our regular guest.
McCullough. McCullough. we have-
McCullough. Okay, besides Peter McCullough, Jason, you're the only one we're gonna have to do a part 2 with because you got so much shit to say, and I got
Love
so
it.
much shit to ask, and we keep interrupting you because we get excited. But yeah, we gotta do it again. Look, where do you want people to connect with you, on your YouTube, or where do you prefer?
Just connect with me on LinkedIn. Also, my
LinkedIn.
website. LinkedIn is I post almost every single day on LinkedIn. It's where
Okay.
I post most of my content. Go and follow the E-commerce Edge podcast if you're interested at all in e-commerce, omni-channel, digital retail. And then, my website, which is greenwoodconsulting.net. That's kind of where all my appearances, like, for example, when you guys publish this, I'll put a link to this on my profile on my website. So kind of it's the hub of kind of everything, and it includes links out to all my podcast channels and everything. So yeah, LinkedIn, my podcast, and my website. Those are the 3 main places.
Okay, I'm on here right now, and I will do that. Chris, any last minute questions? We have a Zoom to jump on, another one.
Yeah, we're 3 minutes late. So, no, it was a pleasure. Like I said, really could have got off on, not like we didn't already on the political side of this.
Oh yeah.
Really, I still have a ton of questions about why you originally came here. So again, a second episode's in order. I don't know how much of the business information we can get to, but hopefully a little better job next time.
Yep, no problem. I look forward to it. It was a fantastic chat. You guys are super cool and super chill, and I'd love to hang out and chat with you guys again.
Likewise, Jason.
Cheers.
Sounds good, Jason. Thank you. Everyone, go connect with Jason right now. His LinkedIn is underneath. Stop playing. Bye-bye.